Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Heather McLean, Head of SVG Europe Audio. Welcome to our AI Audio Forum, Localising Global Broadcasts. Now, sports broadcasters have been faced with making sure that every live production is accessible to as many viewers as possible across the territories for a long time. However, this challenge has been escalated by the European Accessibility Act, the EAA, from the EU, which became effective in 2025. Now, we're going to talk about this directive, what it means for broadcasters, as well as the issue of audio accessibility in live sports. Our speakers today are South of Sound's Rob Oldfield, co-founder and CEO, SyncWord's VP of Business Development and Strategy, Giovanni Galvez, Robin Herrin, Atemi's Director of Standardization, Charles Bronson, Dolby Laboratories Solutions Architect, Broadcast and Live Streaming, James Cowdery, Dolby Laboratories Senior Staff Architect, and last but not least, Alex Lepeltier, Synapse Chief Technology Officer, who's replacing Will Berry, Synapse Chief Revenue Officer, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. Please remember to post questions in the chat at the bottom of your screen throughout the discussion, and our speakers and chairs will pick that up as we go. And talking of chairs, our chair today is the amazing Roger Charlesworth. We are going to kick things off with Rob setting the scene, but first over to you, Roger.
Thanks, Heather, and thanks everybody for joining today. We've talked a lot about AI in autonomous mixing functions. And I think today we're going to shift the focus a little bit in terms of personalization, customization, and accessibility of content for global distribution. And we're seeing a kind of a revolution now in terms of direct-to-consumer distribution that allows content to be more efficiently exploited globally. And we're also seeing large organizations seeking to acquire global rights to content, which in turn needs to be localized for a lot of different markets. And this is a sort of an ongoing story. So what we're looking at today a little bit is how some of the companies on this call are working together to localize content for different languages and for accessibility. And this is an ongoing project with some of the companies involved. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Rob to just give us an overview of it and bring in some of the pieces and parts that put it together.
Nice one. Yeah, thanks, Roger. Thanks, Heather, for having us. I think this is such an important conversation that we're having today. And I mean, I don't know how aware everybody is of the EAA regulations. I'm sure to some this is like old news, to some this is like, wait, what? But, you know, all of this is a big deal for the broadcast world. And it's exciting to me that we're moving from a kind of optional accessibility model where every now and again a broadcaster or a streamer pops up with something, goes, whoa, we're being accessible, and it's a kind of almost like a novelty. And I feel like up to now a lot of these things have been one-off experiences, potentially novelty driven and kind of PR exercises, research and development projects, those kind of things. But we're moving from that optional accessibility to an expected accessibility, which is really, really good news for everybody. That's the whole point of it. But, you know, particularly kind of marginalized or kind of smaller communities, the hearing impaired, visually impaired communities, which aren't actually small communities at all. Shock horror. And making this content accessible is really great. And it's also globalized. So the rules state that any language that you offer this content in has to be accessible within that language. So if you're offering a French production, then yes, you have to provide French audio description, subtitling, and sign language as well. And then there are also kind of other things that come into that in terms of kind of user interface, interactivity, kind of tools that just kind of get rid of all the blockers, stop all the things that are stopping people from accessing all this great content. And I think we all know that up to now, actually, the communities that kind of deserve and require the best experiences, the best audio experiences, i.e. the visually impaired, are often getting the very worst audio experiences, where it's an afterthought. If you do get any audio description, it means that the whole program is typically done in mono just because it needs to be done quick and nobody's kind of generated the bandwidth for it. And there's nobody on staff to specifically mix it and whatever. And I think there's been a bottleneck for a while in terms of, well, how do we do these things at scale? You can offer, like I say, one-off events, possibly, but when you want to look at doing things at scale and across multiple languages, because, we're seeing, as Roger said, this kind of what's the word? Coming together of these, like the VOD world and the live world, and viewers expect that kind of consistency of experience, so the likes of the mega scalers, the big streamers, who've historically done motion picture and episodic content, now moving into live sports, entertainment shows. And so if you expect to watch Stranger Things in one of 30 different languages or whatever it's offered in, why are live sports not getting the same treatment? And so I think as people are kind of navigating through these different channels, you want to have that consistency of experience, no matter it doesn't matter whether you're watching live or whether you're watching VOD content, you should be able to have the same experience. And that is, of course, the case in terms of multi-language content, whether that's audio description, subtitling, or just kind of different language of commentaries. And that's what the EAA is really pushing hard and putting, pressure on streamers and broadcasters. And so I think this is a great opportunity as vendors to produce something really special and to use these regulations not as a kind of noose around everyone's neck, but actually an opportunity to drive innovation and to drive better experiences that are more accessible and that are higher quality. So in short, big opportunity, and I think this is good. And so one of the things that we're wanting to have a conversation around on today's session is really a multi-vendor approach. I mean, I think it's fair to say that there's no kind of one company that provides the silver bullet for all of these solutions, but actually it's about bringing together the experts in all the different fields and elements of this, so that the kind of the sum is greater than the value of its parts, and we're able to kind of deploy this quickly. So these regulations came into place, I think, last July. So that it's been in place for a while, and we're kind of still in that grace period where you're only getting a slap on the wrist if you haven't kind of managed to put all these things in place. But the time is coming where I think these are going to be mandated a little bit more heavily. So it's important that as an industry we deploy this fast. So what we're going to present on today's call is this kind of ongoing collaboration. It's a multi-vendor collaboration that kind of shows that this is available now. Like, we're not talking about some future and next audio workflow that kind of one day in 2037 we'll be able to deploy. This is something that's happening now, and obviously we're leveraging a number of AI tools that are kind of pushing this into the realms of possibility for everyday business as usual broadcast content, rather than these kind of special landmark events. And so obviously this is not a challenge. Well, it's not that much of a challenge if you're dealing with offline things where you can kind of do the overdubbing, and you've got quite a long time actually to kind of do the voiceovers, get the talent and everything like that. But when you're doing things live, things become a lot more challenging, and trying to get that latency down as absolutely as low as possible, but still being able to kind of churn out a lot of content that is kind of going to be regionalized and globalized is a challenge. And I think on this call, we have some phenomenal companies who've done some really amazing innovations that are making all of this a reality. So to come together as a collective as part of this ongoing collaboration is a really powerful thing. So I'm going to stop in a second and introduce the partners. If I just share my screen, that might actually make life a little easier. Oh, I want that one. So assuming everyone can see what I'm showing, these are the companies that have been involved in this this kind of collaboration. So let me just point to them directly. Do you guys want to introduce yourself? Gio, I'll start with you because you're in the top left-hand corner from SyncWords. Do you want to just introduce yourself? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. This is Giovanni Galvez. I am the Vice President of Sales Engineering and Strategy for SyncWords in New York.
Nice. We've got AWS, who aren't specifically on this call, but it goes without saying that these kind of solutions are cloud deployable. And so that was a big part of the puzzle, was being able to install that in AWS instance. And I think I'll go next. So I'm Rob Oldfield, co-founder of Salsa Sound, and we're automated audio mixing. And so that was a big part of our involvement in this project, was to bring all those streams together for automated mixing. And we'll talk a bit more about that. Alex, Synapse.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Pote. I'm CTO at Synapse. Synapse is a lesser-known company based out of the UK, but we offer real-time AI-enabled sign language translation for live events, for VOD, for transport. But live events is really where we're seeing kind of a big uptake in this space. It's been a really interesting project to get involved in.
Absolutely, thanks. And in the middle there, also not on this particular panel, but Moby were a significant part of what we're going to be presenting today. So Moby, company that does a lot of video encoding, specifically kind of low latency solutions, and video and data, bringing those two together as a kind of cloud video engine. Go and check those guys out. They do some cool stuff. And I don't know if anyone's heard of Dolby. Is that a very unknown company? Jokes. I don't know who from Dolby is going to just share a little bit.
Hi, everyone. Oh, James, go ahead.
Go ahead, Charles.
Hi, everyone. This is Charles, and James and I are here on behalf of Dolby. I work as a solutions architect on the live end-to-end ecosystem, solving problems that we currently have in the live ecosystem. I work closely with the Americas team, delivering solutions and solving problems for consumers that want to deliver live experiences across the United States, but also globally sometimes. So you can go ahead, James.
Hi, I'm James Cowdery. I'm an architect at Dolby, just looking at the kind of more bigger picture of how AI is going to change the media industry, and specifically how next generation audio fits into that.
Nice. And then kind of finally, bottom right-hand corner in terms of delivery, Robin, are you there?
Yep. So my name is Robin Heron. I am a director of standardization, one out of 3 director of standardizations as part of the CTO office at ATEM. I'm based out of New York, but since there are 3 of us, we actually have been following, as part of the standardization process, the European Accessibility Act. As you're saying, Rob, it's kind of fitting that we come in last, as essentially as part of the whole Roots suite of tests that we actually did. We're essentially part of we're essentially the glue, actually, that kind of just aggregates everything together at the end. And we essentially took care of both the video and audio encoding and delivery for this entire test that we did together.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys, for that intro. So this is basically kind of in terms of like this global experience that we're offering to it's not just, by the way, the EAA. This is something that needs to be done anyway. It's just helpful that the EAA is kind of encouraging it and adding a little bit of fuel to the fire, or appetite to the stomach, or however you want to describe that. But our goal really for this kind of POC is really about kind of, like I said, it's multi-vendor, and it's bringing in all these different expertise to kind of produce something great for the live industry in particular. It is about kind of setting a new baseline and saying this is the expected level, like that, showing what's possible and then building on that so that we can look at some more next gen stuff and kind of enable us to build on a solid foundation to do things that are even better. And obviously, in terms of like areas of focus and the things that we'll be speaking about today, multi-language captions, big deal, obviously. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of production and kind of best practices in audio mixing and dialogue and ducking and things like that. A really big piece, which I think we haven't discussed loads in this particular audio community up till now, is around sign language and how that can be driven from commentaries and audio workflows. And so Alex at Synapse will be talking to that shortly. And then we've got kind of, how does this work in an immersive way? Like, don't want to just kind of, like I say, force everything down a mono pipe and give everybody kind of a shoddy experience. This needs to be best in class, fully immersive experience. And a big part of that is kind of, how do we actually deliver this? And how can we do this in a real world live environment that gets to real people's end user devices in a way that can be scaled rather than just kind of a one-off POC in an R&D environment. So that's the group of companies that were brought together. And then this is kind of a very, very basic kind of workflow of how did we put the wheels on this thing. So just to give it a kind of very broad brush overview, we had a Dolby Live playout system that was kind of mimicking a live content in HDR with Atmos, and that was music and effects plus multiple dialogues and audio description. So in English, that was delivered PCM to SyncWords, who performed some magic that Gio will be able to talk to. It's not really magic. It's AI-driven kind of auto translation and those kind of fun things that then got delivered. This is all, like I say, happening in an AWS environment to Synapse, who were able to generate live sign language from the English captions, and Salsa Sound doing the automatic mixing between all those different languages and the audio descriptions. So lots and lots of different mixes. And then Moby muxing those different video and audio feeds together to deliver to a term that then did the kind of the global distribution so that it could actually hit end user devices with AC4 as the codec. So I think that is really, really fast, brief overview, but that kind of hopefully gives you a kind of a broad brush idea of how that workflow works. But I think it would be really helpful to go into a little bit more depth on each of those blocks so you can understand a little bit about how the technology works and what the kind of possibilities with this are, that hopefully will kind of stimulate a little bit of questions. So I think it probably makes sense to go from left to right, follow the diagram as the signal flow rides. So Charles, do you want to kind of kick us off and just kind of talk folks through how we began, how the chain begins?
Yep. So starting from left to right, Dolby was involved in the playout part. Also, in a lot of situations, it could have been a cloud playout, but for this particular use case, we had content that was pre-generated with music and effects and with multiple dialogues and an audio description track. In most of these live events that we currently have, the content that we receive is normally in the form of complete main, and the challenge here is extracting the dialogue from the complete main. That's where Salsa comes in order to extract the dialogue and give us some music and effects with the music, and give us the music and effects and the the primary language. So we have an M&E plus D. In cases where we need audio description, content is routed through a NOC where we have a describer watching the action and describing it. Things get in sync. And then obviously we do the contribution. And for this particular use case, we did audio in PCM over SMPTE 302. And this was an SRT stream going into the cloud. It was fed to SyncWords, which obviously SyncWords takes in the language, creates the multiple languages and also the closed captions. So I think I'll hand it off to Gio for the SyncWords part, and then we'll come back to the AC4 part and the authoring of AC4 as well as the playback components of AC4 that bring all of this together.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. So this was, I also didn't believe in magic, as Rob mentioned, when I started this whole workflow. But actually, as things developed, I started believing in it, because it was magic to see everyone working together and getting something that's never been done actually accomplished in the live realm. And we ran into some bottlenecks here and some kind of, I would say, not roadblocks, but more like big kind of like speed bumps. And and one of them was we needed to be able to handle configurations that had surround sound, like Atmos surround sound, and be able to isolate the center channel so that we would then replace that and contribute to salsa sound, the dubbing in mono PCM. So we had to do that for both AD and just the regular feed, and we had to do that in SRT as well. So that was another aspect of it where it made sense for us to be in the same kind of region as well. And then the other speed bump was the language support. When you're talking about SRT and transport stream, typically people do teletext or DVB subs or 608, and none of those really fit the bill here because we had to support multiple languages, 5 and or more even, and we had to use Asian characters, Unicode characters, as well as right to left characters, and so we went with DVB TTML, and that allowed us to basically add subtitles, as many as we wanted, in the PIDs into the transport stream. Later on, we also figured out a way where, just for simplicity, for us to contribute the subtitles downstream from a temp. I won't get too much into that, but that was more of a CMAF ingest. And we felt that we needed to do that because synchronization was critical, right? We needed a way to make sure that the subtitle translations, kind of like at the last mile, would be in sync with the audio. And because there was all this processing with Synapse and Salsa after us, the sync ended up happening ahead of the packager in the temp. But overall, this was really like a very successful implementation. And another thing that was important is to use different LLMs for the actual dubbing as well as the subtitling translation. It's important that certain language pairs just perform better with specific LLMs. So we built a workflow there where we can just pick and choose. I needed Gemini here, I needed DeepL over here, I needed Bedrock Nova over here, and that gave us not only the ability to have very high quality translations, but also you could prompt the LLM and say, hey, this is for sports, or this is for track and field, or whatever the case may be. So please translate in the style of a TV commentator. And that gave us the results we wanted. All right, I'll stop there. I'll hand it over back to you, Rob.
Yeah, absolutely love that. And the other element that I think you were doing was kind of having different voices, and so translations that matched the voice of the original. Could you just talk to that briefly?
Yeah, that was also another requirement because there's two aspects to that. One, we needed on ingest from Dolby, we needed a way to identify and analyze the voices, right? So if when the voice changed, we needed to change the voice on the synthetic voice dubbing as well. That was a challenge, but we made that work. The other challenge is to capture the emotion, right? We call it voice cloning. It's not exactly cloning, but it's basically if someone's whispering or someone's excited, that level of analysis, it basically can transfer onto the dubs, right? Which is what you want for sports. You can't have like a monotone voice, right? You need that tonality, and that was able to be done with the live pipeline here.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. Oh, I've just inadvertently got rid of the slideshow. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that, Gio. Alex, I'm going to throw the proverbial ball to you to just talk a bit about the sign language thing, because I think that is absolutely fascinating in what you guys achieved in advance of the project, but also during the project is just off the charts. If you could kind of enlighten us more, that'd be great.
Yeah, it was interesting because I suppose ahead of the project, we'd never considered live as an area to really go into. We were very much in the VOD space with long turnarounds, and I suppose live in the live transport area, but very different from live media. So when we approached the project, we didn't support things like SRT. We didn't support HLS, and it was really, I suppose, not cobbled together is probably the wrong word, but the first version was cobbled together. And we worked really closely with SyncWords to come up with a solution that works, and we've since built on that as we've kind of gone through. So the way it worked for this project was SyncWords would capture sentences from the captions, and well, we find that translation into sign language works best on the sentence level because you get the context around the sentence, and sign language is very contextual. So SyncWords would send us a sentence over our HTTP API. We would run that through an LLM and turn that English sentence into sign language grammar in the grammatical structure of British Sign Language. We would then run that through our generative AI models, generate a video of that sentence in sign language, turn it into HLS, and then send it back to SyncWords. Originally, we tried doing it over WebSocket, and then we moved over to an RESTful API so we could have more control over that. And SyncWords would stitch it back into their pipeline and then send it off to Moby for the final picture-in-picture overlay. And it worked really well. We got nice control. There were issues with syncing. I think that's kind of a general theme that we found throughout the whole project on how do we get sign language video generation down to a speed that's palatable, but at least with SRT you can buffer it. I think around the time we're around the 30 seconds mark, we're now pushing towards 7 seconds latency, so making great strides towards doing that, but it's a kind of a constant improvement that we have to make there. But it worked really well. It was a very nice partnership with SyncWords and continues to be.
Yeah, I like that. Such an important element of that, and I think we'll end up probably just circling back onto some of those points that you mentioned, certainly around kind of the synchronization, latency elements. And I should say that this is a simplified diagram. If you're wondering why there are, people referring to things going backwards and forwards and kind of across, but this is kind of the broad brush of it. And there's obviously more detail if you were to really explore under the hood. But obviously another big part of this is how we actually create the audio presentations. And so have an M&E bed, and then managing those different dialogue outputs and the audio description, and kind of creating like ducking metadata and things so that later on down the user end that can be rendered appropriately on end user devices over 514 Atmos, 5.1 stereo, whatever the output mix was. So that was kind of a big audio routing and mixing engine from Salsa that was kind of making sure that we hit all the loudness standards. Another element to that is we have within our Mixer software language detection, so we can tell whether or not there is any discrepancy between what we're expecting to receive on the different languages of dialogues and the different languages of audio description are actually what we're receiving, which obviously, as these kind of things become everyday business as usual, there will be mistakes in routing that happen every now and again, shocker, specifically in a live environment where things happen very, very quickly. So having some kind of detection that can flag back down the chain to say, wait a second, we've got an incorrect language here. You need to adjust the routing, or or maybe there's some settings further back down that need to be adjusted with that. Another element which we didn't actually deploy in this particular setup, but that's also really helpful in a live environment when you're kind of producing those elements that can be kind of created as objects, I guess, is profanity filtering, which is another thing that we've been developing at Salsa to automatically take out profanity and potentially offer two different versions. So you could have the kind of the post 9 o'clock watershed version and the pre 9 o'clock watershed version, one sanitized, one not sanitized, those kind of things. So there's a kind of a nice audio production piece there that we end up having multiple languages, multiple audio descriptions, an M&E bed that gets sent separately that go to Moby. And it's kind of a shame that no one from Moby is here to kind of show off what they're able to do in terms of muxing that video and putting the graphics overlays and kind of managing that kind of SRT contribution that then went to ATEM. And perhaps, Robin, you could do a better job of describing that part of the signal chain for us.
Yeah. So first, to just kind of restart everything and to kind of also remind everyone as to what the scope of the test. We were essentially trying to see how far we could push the current state of automation with AI with a typical distribution, production, contribution, and then distribution process that we would do for a live event. That's how we essentially started with this. The operation that Dolby is doing in this process, essentially simulating a typical playout that you would have with one of their very well curated pieces of content that we know for a fact is both from a video quality standpoint, a great piece of content, and from an audio standpoint, sets the good base that we can actually start from. From there, SyncWords creates the additional audio declinations, the proper subtitling. Synapse reuses that subtitling to create the avatar. Salsa is able to create the proper amount of audio mixes needed. Moby realigns, and then we take all that. From there, a couple of things that we realized. First one is if you actually have we need to actually separate the streams into two separate pipelines ultimately in a similar way that you see here, because adding the sign language avatar onto the video essentially means that if you actually apply that along with the subtitling, you're essentially almost corrupting both at the same time, which means you kind of had to separate those two pipelines in the first place. So that means that from our side, we essentially had to create almost two separate services dedicated. One dedicated for sign language, and another one with pretty much everything else. Second, taking in all that stream, both of these streams, we essentially realized that we ended up with such high level of bandwidth for the audio mixes. As it turns out, the audio with Sensi302M ended up actually taking more bandwidth than the video itself, which I have to admit that was not something that I've seen very often. third, and then we get into some of the distribution aspects that Joe was mentioning earlier. Sending captioning over 608, obviously DV sub, you end up being immediately limited by the type of Unicode characters that those standards actually support, which is why we actually moved to TTML. However, even for us, that's where actually we start actually hitting certain limitations, because even for any vendors out there, everybody has their own pivot format that they actually use. In our case, TTML actually is something that we felt was going to be better supported if we actually just implemented directly at the edge, as Joe was saying, essentially adding it straight into the packager. So we essentially added not just our live encoder, but also our just-in-time packager in a way that we actually could even add sync words in between the two and leverage CMAF ingest as a transport protocol to introduce the extra TTML. This way, you're essentially introducing TTML at the edge, at the origin. You don't have to deal with any conversions whatsoever. And from a compatibility standpoint, the just-in packager, if it's at least the one that we have, is essentially then able to actually create the proper adaptations to the proper distribution formats, whether it's WebVTT or you can actually keep it in TTML in Dash, for example. And this way you can actually make sure that you're compatible with every type of end user device. That's for subtitling. Coming back onto the audio, there was also a lot of work that we also had to do on the audio side itself. Being able to leverage AC4 on the outputs, essentially creating the proper representations needed for each language, was a huge advantage for us. Charles, I don't know if you want to get into the depth of this, because I know that's more Dolby's part.
Yeah, so for the audio itself, like Rob touched upon earlier, we had content that was already prepped for this with music and effects plus the dialogues. And we also had an audio description track, which we played out in real time. But there's a lot of processing that Salsa or other tools can actually do before the broadcast mix actually hits the contribution phase, namely dialogue extraction, and then also adding the audio description before we start the transmission. But once we get to the phase where SyncWords is able to add the multiple languages and the multiple audio description tracks, we need authoring metadata that could happen in real time, which would help the audio encoder on the attempt to encode the final stream with music and effects plus multiple dialogues. Right, this is what we call metadata guided audio. So there's authoring tools which can run in AWS and also on-prem that look into these multiple audio assets, and then it would generate music and effects with individual dialogue objects. The reason why I call them objects is because you have the ability to either deliver a fat bit stream with all of the language choices, separating them into different geos, or you also have the ability to do what we call client-side muxing on the AC4 side. And what this client-side muxing is essentially based on the geo. Say the United States has 3 languages, Europe needs like 6 languages, and there's other regions that need 4 or 5 different languages. To each of the edge servers based on that region, what we deliver is the music and effects plus the primary language based on the language choice on the end user's device, or the most common choice for that particular region. It starts out with that particular asset, but what the AC4 bitstream also has is a placeholder for the different language objects that could be replaced in real time. So when we author this, you have serialized ADM metadata driving the encoder within the attempt. I'll let James touch upon serialized ADM in a bit. Attempt then takes this, encodes it to AC4, sends it out as different bit streams going to different regions, and then when all of this comes together at the end device using ExoPlayer, this was delivered using Dash, and the ExoPlayer was used for playback. What would happen is the user would then receive the first language, which is either the language of choice on the device or the user setting a particular language. And then as the user progresses and picks other languages, the device will then fetch that from the edge server and then replace the existing language with the new language. So we tried this in real time. It worked. Obviously, we have latency issues, but there's other intelligence features that we want to add or we're working on adding, like ADNR, where you can duck the background noise and bring up the dialogue based on the device selection. We have different choices on the loudness levels from low, mid, high. You can even turn off the commentator for live events if you thought you just wanted to watch the action and be in the middle of the stadium. And yeah, the things like profanity filter is also a component that would add to the challenge. But one of the biggest challenges that we had while doing multiple languages was to actually keep the length of the language the same. Because if you use a different language, maybe the words are a lot longer than English, and it's not as simple. So for live, that's a big challenge because you're doing that in real time. So yeah, I'll give back to Robin unless you have something else that you want me to cover.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I will say the product overall and all these tests that we've been doing in the past year really does show a lot of collaboration between our different companies, but also how there is an actual intent from the industry to push forward with accessibility as a topic, and how not only we're doing this between companies as vendors, but we've seen actual applications come up in multiple regions. Obviously, we mentioned the European Accessibility Act. I know this specific panel was part of SVG Europe, but there's been requests coming up from pretty much every region at this stage, really, to see how we can not just implement additional languages, do localized content, but also do it at scale, as Rob was saying at the very beginning, which is the actual difficulty ultimately, and doing it in a way that makes financial sense as well for the rights holders.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely love that. Did we talk much about end user devices and how this experience is picked up? Charles, I guess I'll throw that to you.
Yeah. So again, going back to so now we've covered a little bit on the production side and distribution. Going to playback, there's different devices that we had to cover, like mobile devices and television sets. I mean, these are the most common use cases for a lot of these POCs. So we thought about Android and we were like, hey, ExoPlayer is probably the easiest way to do it. And the challenge there is presenting all of these different languages and labels in a way that doesn't overwhelm the user. So some of these language tags may appear during the presentation itself. Some of these language and label choices might have to be set at the device level, where you actually go in and say, hey, this is the primary language that I want. Just give me the other labels that I can use to then modulate the main feed, where you would want to set a different dialogue level, or you want to turn off commentary completely. So that was one of the challenges that we had. We were like, hey, we have a big screen, and then we could populate that with like 6 or 8 different languages without overwhelming the screen. But what happens to a mobile user when they're listening to the same feed? Or there could be a situation where we would target the mobile device with the stereo feed, and then you would actually have a stereo music and effects bed with the different dialogues that you want to choose, or the different dialogues at different loudness levels that you want to choose. Plus, there were 2 final assets that we're trying to deliver, one with the sign language and the other one without. There was closed captioning, and then we needed to make sure that all of this worked. So for the POC, we used ExoPlayer. We generated 2 separate dash assets, and then these were 2 separate thumbnails. End user would pick one with sign language or the other one without. And then based on the language choice, you would have the closed captions, and in real time, because of DST, you could actually, in real time, because of AC4, you would actually be able to then choose the different languages on the fly without having to go to the settings in order to pick your language. So it was quite a challenge, but we got it to work. And then, go ahead, Rob, if you have something else to say about it.
I was just going to say it's more of general responses. That's not necessarily specific to this POC, but more of a general observation based on a year and a half of testing at this point. In the case of this POC, we did test with Shaka Player, we did test with Exoplayer, we've also tested with a couple of TVs. What you end up realizing eventually is that the level of interoperability, even if you follow the standards, is still going to be a work in progress. There will be some devices that unfortunately may not have. You're going to look at the stream, it's going to work, and then you open up to select the certain language, you're going to see one of the languages mentioning that it's undefined. All of those languages, they're actually supposed to be defined by the ISO 639-2 language descriptors. To give you an example right now, I think during this POC specifically, we tested with Mandarin, Hebrew, Arabic, French, Spanish. I think I'm missing one. But we tested with a wide variety of languages. Very recently, I did a similar test testing with Swahili, and it's actually the first one that actually came up as undefined on a couple of TVs. Turns out that supposedly the reason might be that declaring as the ISO 639-2 language descriptor as SWA, which would be for Swahili, turns out that it's a macro descriptor, not a micro descriptor, and then there's different declinations specific to it. So there's additional levels of configurations that needs to be taken into account, and then there's interoperability with the end devices, which I'm sure the CTA has as a whole a suite of tests that actually perform on those things. So you can actually do as much as you want, as much as you can, and you should do that. But there will also always be some interrupt that you may have to deal with.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning about that, Robbie. The challenge that we have on the playback side is also about the different APIs we need to use for language choices. So sometimes, especially with Exoplayer moving to Media 3, there was a bit of a change in how APIs need to access the language choices. So we struggled with that a little bit in the start, where we had to use APIs in order to get all the language tags populated properly. But again, different devices had different SDKs implemented. So some devices would allow APIs to work and some didn't. So we could use a Fire Stick, for example. FireCube we couldn't use because it had an older SDK. We had similar experiences on television sets that ran Android. We also had an experimental WebOS app for LGs that worked, but LGs the LG option worked better for the ATSC TVs because ATSC TVs had a better implementation. So this is always going to be a challenge, and then as we continue to evolve and as we continue to push the limits on some of these delivering some of these experiences in real time, we'll obviously start off with streaming and then we go to live. I think this will become a lot easier and a lot more clear for end users to actually start adopting.
Yeah, I think that's just been a big deal for the last good number of years, isn't it? The kind of device support and kind of device abnormalities is kind of like the scourge of the audio world, isn't it? Somebody told me about the box that a TV comes in costs more than the whole audio system within a TV, which just shows you that sometimes it's kind of can be a bit of an afterthought, and even more so when we're talking about these kind of more advanced features. You do get some serious curveballs when you're messing around with domestic devices, that's for sure. We're sort of over halfway.
Yeah, Rob, can we back up a little bit and maybe just look at the whole picture? I think I have a couple of questions, and then we jump in. Want to talk a little bit about the cost model. I want to talk about cloud versus on-prem, and where we are in terms of latency and synchronization for doing this end-to-end. And again, looking at this whole all singing, all dancing, multiple languages, sign language, captions. Where should we start?
That's a lot of questions.
Well, but it's sort of what where can we get to in terms of latency, and where are you able to in these sort of implementations so far?
Let's see.
Yeah,
I see. Well, Roger, I can speak to some advancements on the subtitling side and the translation side. Since we did this POC, a lot of things have happened. And one of the things is there's an introduction now by LLMs of low latency translation, which basically shaves like at least 10 seconds from the whole pipeline, right? Which is critical. What we were dealing with during the POC was we couldn't translate till the end of sentence. And that was, some sentences take, 5 seconds to utter, and some take like 15, 30 seconds to utter. And when that happens, things can get out of sync. Other aspects of it was compression, which is another LLM prompt. When you're translating between languages, if anybody in the audience, speaks English and Spanish or other languages, French, it's not word for word, right? Like the sentences get longer when you translate to Spanish, for example. And when that occurs, you have to have a delay in order to keep things in sync. But through the magic, I keep using this word, Rob, of LLMs, you can tell it, hey, we don't need this long, like kind of literal translation. Can you, when there's only 3 seconds, can you give me like a paraphrase of this so we can stay in sync? And that has allowed us to not only lower latency, but also it's allowed us to stay in sync for long periods of time. Like when we have, like, for example, 24/7 channels, it's not very forgiving if you get out of sync, So I would say the LLM prompts and the speed of translation has really helped us go down from, like, say 30 down to like around 10 for the actual translation.
Wow.
Yeah, that's impressive.
And I suppose that goes into what you were saying earlier, Gio, about sort of optimizing the LLM for exactly what you're trying to do, and whether that's brevity or anything else. What about the sort of cost? What about the sort of cost model?
Could I just circle back to one of the sync things, Roger? Sorry to.
Okay, sure. Sorry.
Just only in that I think sync. I mean, it's really good to talk about kind of like the latency of some of those individual components, but obviously there's multiple elements going on here, and I wonder whether someone could talk to how that is done, should be done, in terms of kind of scaling back the latency to the slowest common denominator. Obviously, we have kind of automated captionings, translations, and sign language. There's a lot of elements there. So I think that would be a useful conversation just to jump in before we go to the costs.
If I may, Rob, just 30 seconds or less. And this is something that maybe Alex can also chime in on. But this was like the biggest difficulty to sync up, right? The sign language. And what we did was we had to add a timing analysis on ingest for the audio and video, right? So even though we're just using the audio to do our speech to text, the video had, MPEG timestamps that allows us to really understand where things need to go when we output. Once we had the speech to text, we could send to Synapse, via their API, so they can convert it to gloss, which is Alex can tell you more. It's like a grammar for sign language. And then when we got the video segments, we could stitch them and then get them in sync, and then hand it off to Moby, right, as separate video assets in the SRT. So that was able to then be composited by Moby and contributed to a TEM. But the key was that timing analysis in the ingest, right? To try to sync it up by just eyeballing it with delays, that really wasn't effective.
And I think that's where we've made actually also a lot of progress since then, not just as Gio was saying with the LLMs themselves making progress, but also our interoperability between different vendors as well. The work that ThinkWords and Atom have been doing on the on CMAP ingest as a protocol, and by actually implementing the spec to the dot, essentially, what we can actually do instead of actually sending out the entire stream to ThinkWords and getting the entire stream back, which essentially adds in the entire latency all the way. Then there's the buffer on ThinkWords side for the LLM, then sending it back. What we can actually do is sending just the audio on a separate stream while you have the actual video being encoded separately. That means you can essentially have your video latency and the video encode just on a separate stream. And then you have your audio latency being sent out on the other side. So essentially, if you actually optimize this way, and let's say, Joe, I'm going to throw a number here, but as you were saying, 10 seconds, if your video encoder is already doing 6 seconds anyway, what you're actually adding for the added translation is not 10 seconds, you're adding 4 seconds effectively. And then you can just sync up again on the same CMAP ingest point at the packager, which is where it's actually very powerful, both as a specification and as a method of delivery at scale, because again, once you actually already have your just-in packager and the origin, that's where you can actually scale up the distribution very quickly.
Wow. Yeah.
That is cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, Roger, you were about to present a question.
No, I mean, that's interesting. And I think the point of leveraging the video encoding delay pre-packager to actually get some free time is useful. But it's amazing how these processes in this whole workflow have been shaved so tightly, and as you guys have collaborated, how that latency has compressed, and really within the scale of live distribution, really these latencies are pretty small within other distribution delays. What about a couple of things? You guys have been able to do this in the cloud in AWS, and it's been very convenient to go be in the same AWS data center and easily talk to each other within the cloud. What about cloud versus prem, and what are some of the advantages? What are some of the things that you could do on prem that are a bit more difficult to do on cloud?
That's probably something just to clarify. I don't know if it came across clear in Rob's diagram, but we were all in different AWS accounts in different regions. So it wasn't as simple as kind of everyone being in the same AWS account. I think that would have simplified the process very considerably. And even more so, if you go on-prem, it's the direction that we're seeing at Synapse. Like, we support on-prem deployments now because latency is so important in the live space. But yeah, I mean, that was an added complexity to the project that if maybe even if we'd all been in the US, for example, we would have shaved off a good couple of seconds there.
I agree.
A little more.
I want to just. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Charles.
Oh, sorry. A little more on that. So when it's on-prem, which we're also seeing a lot of these days with some of the customers, a lot of these signals can be kept in baseband, because when it's on-prem, you could do 2110. And of course, with 2110, you have the ability to split these processes, video and audio separately, where you process video, where you're doing color space conversion, or maybe frame rate conversion, or video overlaps in baseband, and then you bring it all together. So it's a lot more efficient. You have you have a different kind of flexibility when you're doing this on-prem, and you have the ability to throw more resources at it. But AWS also gives you the ability to scale. If you want this, I mean, in terms of cost, you spin this up when you want to do the event, and then you take it down. But on-prem, you're stuck with the cost of whatever you invest in the initial hardware. So those are the minor differences. But again, if you want to hold on to quality when you initially start distributing this, and if quality is a big concern, a lot of the customers pick doing this on-prem. So you have everything in baseband, you have the ability to send this to Salsa and then synchronize things, and then you go to Synapse and bring it back and you tie it all together, and then you have the video overlay, and when everything is done in baseband, you have the ability to send 2110, 41 serialized ADM metadata to the encoder, and the encoder obviously uses that in real time to encode it. So there's certain caveats, but there are certain advantages about doing this in real time on-prem versus the cloud.
And I think as well,
on that note, I'm sorry.
No, Jay,
I just want to, before I forget my thought.
100%.
So on that note, when you're doing POCs, I think you have to do it on the cloud, because you don't want to have a huge investment to try to get things working, especially on the bleeding edge. I think for like, when you're going in production, I think on-prem is a viable choice. However, we just got through the winter sports season, which I'm sure a lot of you guys worked on. And there are times when, like, we work with an OTT platform when they were like basically doing 50 events one day, the next day they were doing 20, the next day they were doing 5. And so if you're going on-prem, the reason they went with cloud was because they didn't want to have to over provision, right? They would rather have like a Kubernetes cluster where they can just spin up pods and then delete them when they don't need them. And that made it a lot more cost effective and scalable. They got through the event, no problem, right? As far as like latency goes, like at least for same language captioning, we saw within the same AWS region 120 milliseconds in and out with SRT. So I don't really think that is, if you don't have an encoder and all you're just doing is just muxing, you can have a very low latency workflow on the cloud. But naturally, there's advantages of 2110, like Charles said, where you can take things out of the critical path and so forth, which are also really important for broadcasters. All right, that's it.
Yeah, no, that is so valuable. I think there's a kind of a hybrid probably as well, where some elements are done on-prem, some elements, perhaps the majority of it is done in cloud, because we're basically talking about an object-based workflow here. And that's not just audio objects, obviously, that's kind of video objects as well. And in some cases, that requires stuff to be done closer to the production end, of which it kind of makes more sense to have some elements on-prem so that you can create clean sources, you can separate out different dialogues at source rather than having to use kind of language separation tools in the cloud, which I think is helpful.
And that's, I think, a great point, is when you realize that this is the goal, then there's a lot you can do in production to design the production around this workflow. So have, in addition to, say, a flattened program, to have all the objects, all the commentary objects separate, so that speeds up the analysis of those, and so that they can be more easily matched. We've been looking at doing this, kind of extracting all this stuff, and if we can integrate it into the production workflow, we can do it more efficiently. I wonder.
I think that's. Sorry, Roger.
I was just going to say, Rob, I think if Neil Roberts is on the line, maybe I'd love to hear his comments if he's still.
I'm here, Roger.
It's
hi, Neil.
worth saying that Neil is the mastermind of bringing these together. I don't know whether he would be humble.
I may have pulled everybody together, but you guys did all the work. So,
like Mike says, we all work for Neil.
I appreciate that for sure. So I think this certainly. Look, a lot of people know about my passion for HDR, but what a lot of people don't realize is that I have a significantly greater passion for accessible features, and it's super, super critical, right? Like I think Rob mentioned earlier, we've, as an industry, been really bad about presenting accessible features, or really an equal TV viewing experience for everyone, regardless of that viewer's needs, right? And a need is not always a disability. Just because you don't speak English and we're only producing the program that you're watching in English doesn't mean we should exclude you. And that's certainly not a disability. On the same front, to Rob's point, multi-language, multi-channel audio is really, really critical, right? Imagine being a blind user and turning on the opening ceremony of the Olympics, which has a lot of dead space. And as sighted viewers, we know what's happening. But when you go to enable audio description, your immersive audio experience like this comes down like this. And sure, you have an idea of what's going on, but you as that blind user actually deserve that immersive experience way more than any of us here on this call that can see the television and our eyes are telling us the story. So super critical. I will add to one of the last comments there. I've talked about this, Roger. I think I talked about it in Detroit. We'll talk about it again at the Audio Summit, I think, at NAB in a couple of weeks. But some of this, in my opinion, makes a lot of sense to ask the audio mixers in trucks or PCRs to make some changes to the way that they're mixing and decouple that dialogue from that M&E, right? And so monitor in the primary language in the truck or in the production space that you have, but don't deliver that dialogue embedded in that mix, and start using the center channel as an M&E viable opportunity to include in your mix and really create an even more immersive mix. Even further, long-term, what I'm looking at from this perspective, and we are at WBD actively pursuing all of these pieces, and this is partially why I want to know who's going to be at NAB, because I've got a lot of follow-ups, but I think one of the things that I'm thinking about long-term is client-side mixing rather than multiple renditions coming out of a transcoder upstream, where we deliver M&E all the time, and your primary language perhaps is the language in your region or the last thing you watched or your profile settings, and that's the first thing you get. But perhaps you want to enable a feature or make a change, fine. And yeah, there is some added latency here. We're never going to get away from that. There's a lot happening here. So what I'm investigating is finding ways to say, okay, we're going to deliver you the lowest latency stream we can to start with none of the features that you might want to enable. Then as you enable them, we'll message on the platform to say, hey, you've chosen a solution or you've chosen a feature that requires a little more latency to create. If you want that lower latency solution, disable that feature, right? So just a little messaging until we can get better as an industry at lowering the latency. But low latency should never be a blocker to delivering content for everyone, regardless of their needs, right? So let's think through some of those things as we continue to push these across the industry.
Right. Well, and this sort of exploiting content globally, whether it's little niche sports or whether it's huge global events that are distributed by a mega scaling direct-to-consumer service, that sort of swallowing this content is and being able to distribute it efficiently is sort of part of the challenge. And I think that's an ongoing thing. And we're just talking about commentary and language and accessibility, but ultimately we'll have to confront storytelling and how do we tell different stories about, we've got a in-car camera and how do we have customized audio for that in-car camera, or how do we chop up golf into different stories for different markets. So this is an ongoing problem that goes beyond audio.
If I could add just one more thing, coming back to the Synapse piece that you guys were talking through earlier. When we kicked this project off, I reached out to the guys at Synapse. I think actually I reached out to Sally directly and said, hey, do you want to try this thing? And Alex and Will and Sally got together with me on email and said, we've never done it live. And I said, you want to try? They said, yeah, let's try it. And so they reached out about 2 weeks later. I got together with the whole team and reached out and said, good news, we got it working. I said, that's incredible. They said, yeah, but it's 10 minutes of latency. Not really that much, but it was a lot. And I said, oh, that's more like VOD, but do you want to keep going? And they said, yeah, we absolutely do. And it kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter until the first demo that I gave for this particular project, I got a message from, I think it was you, Alex, and he said, hey, we got down to sub 20 seconds within like 5 weeks. So really, really impressive. And that's the work that I think came together. Rob and your team, you guys, Max, you were doing a huge amount of work. Geo and Robin getting together for the CMAF ingest and all the pieces there. It was absolutely incredible to see it all come together like it did. And I'm really, really excited to see where this thing goes, whether it's me or someone else adopting it. Happy to walk anyone through some of the things that we experienced and our approach at WBD, because this is not a race to who can get there first. This is a race for all of us to collaborate as a whole industry and get this thing across the line in any way we can, right? So I am fully transparent and open, regardless of whether you're a WBD person or not. Happy to dig in as an industry advocate.
And I think to that extent, I think we're not even close to being done. There's still more standardization work that needs to happen, whether it's just on standardization on audio profiles themselves within different SDOs, whether it's ATSC, SEMC, and others. We talked about the way we had to actually burn into the video the Synapse avatar. We know for a fact that there's specification work that's actually happening at -IF to specifically solve this actually and have a way you can toggle on and off that the interpreter in a way that would make a lot more sense for distribution and would be a lot more user friendly also for people to just be able to simply add it on and off on the player side, on the client side. So there's still more work that's also happening. And again, this is not going to be a one-time POC, as Rob was saying earlier. This is something that's working now and will keep improving as it goes.
I think EB1 is a great solution for that, Robin.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
On that note, and we kind of mentioned it earlier, but James, I wonder if I could bring you in a little bit, is how we're starting to see deployments of AC4 on some services, notably Peacock. How did next generation codecs help us here?
Yeah, I mean, the whole subject is really interesting with next generation audio, because next generation audio, despite its name, is quite an old concept. It's been around for 10 years now. I always kind of joke, oh yeah, next generation audio is that thing we've been talking about for 10 years. And maybe thinking about this, you think, well, AI, this is going to replace all of that. But actually, I see it more as the way in which the vision of next generation audio as it was laid out with ATSC3 10 years ago is being realized. And with this POC, this is obviously addressing the accessibility aspect of that. But next generation audio was a big kind of bold dream of providing wider personalization, multi-language support, all these things, all under a kind of single umbrella. But very, it's only had limited adoption. And I think that it required organizations to take big risks on trying to putting a lot of resources into enabling certain features, and that has happened to a certain extent, but not widely. Where I see AI as being the way that next generation audio can go kind of mainstream, and the technologies that next generation audio has brought in, which is two of them that really stand out to me, is stream separation. So going from a single stream approach to separate audio and video elements. That's really important theme. And then also the use of metadata. Content analysis is expensive and can generate a lot of latency. And which is that's coming up as a kind of constant theme, is trying to kind of keep latency down. So for me, involved in how defining of metadata schemes for audio and looking at the developments here, you think, well, okay, what information is going to be required to exchange between vendors to enable interoperability, to come up with an overall system, a complex system that can work efficiently with the lowest latency. And then that's a really interesting question.
Well, and there's a question too about how AI can be, we've been talking about it, sort of AI in terms of the media, but how do we leverage AI to manage that metadata and set these things up? So these aren't manual processes or lookup tables. They're just the metadata goes into an AI engine, which figures out where everything goes.
Yeah, I mean, these metadata formats are extremely complicated. Like serialized ADM is horrendous to try and parse it. I mean, to just even understand the structure is very difficult, but for a human, but it's ideal for automation, right? So I would expect similar things. Serial ADM solves the problem of describing the audio itself, but surely in order to make an efficient system, we need to be able to communicate lots of things about the content, like who's on the ball, who's speaking, any event that happens that could be useful for a commentary or for direction. All of this information, once extracted, needs to be shared.
That's a good point. On that note, it seems like speech to text is kind of like the foundation for all of this stuff, and that has to be that's a critical step. And one thing we ran into along the lines of what you're saying, James, is we need it to accurately translate to certain languages. We need it like a gender detection. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Like certain languages, like Russian, for example, Ukrainian, Spanish, everything has a gender. Even like a chair, right? And so that was a key thing. But for sports, what we found out is that not everyone speaks the same language on input, right? All of a sudden you're interviewing like the German player, next thing you're interviewing, the French footballer. So what one key like advancement is this auto language detection on input, on ingest. And then what we would do is we would then always output to like say synapse. So like whoever's doing the ASL or BSL, they're always going to get BSL. They're always going to get French if they need French, or they're always going to get Spanish, no matter what language is speaking on input. And that it's kind of like a huge leap forward, because before it was basically like, okay, nothing gets transcribed. It's totally silence because they're speaking a different language, right? We saw that, I think there was a famous case with like the Grammy Awards and Bad Bunny, I think a few years ago. And so live sports has to be multilingual, not only on output, but on input as well, in order for all of this to work right.
Well, and that's where sort of integrating in production and doing more object-oriented production helps too, because then if we can sort of identify what those streams are, we're not having to do so much analysis blind. Yeah. Anything else?
One of the things.
I'll just add that what we kept saying through the project was, without good audio, you don't have good captions. Without good captions, you don't have good sign language. And it all starts at that core. So that's where Rob and team really come into play. But even before that decoupling, I guess, of dialogue and the M&E is so critical.
Yeah.
Well, and in this case, if we can, separate all those commentaries out.
Yeah.
And I think we look at how the content gets exploited in terms of future. I think having a more modular approach to production is valuable for other reasons. And I think we end up doing, separate NAT sounds and all these sort of separate mixes. And at some point, that's becoming really inefficient. And so taking a more object-oriented production approach actually brings some other efficiencies in how the content is managed for real time. And again, whether it's live commentary or whether it's AI generated commentary, I think all the workflows we've been talking about also apply to live commentary for a big language. That it's not all necessarily generated. synthesized. So, well, this is exciting stuff.
Yep.
By the way, Roger, just again, speaking of full transparency and industry movement and forward momentum, we did get AC4 coming out of our home-built transcoder, live transcoder at Warner Brothers Discovery. We call it Aventus. We are moving forward. So anyone who's got questions about implementations, and I mean, Robin, of course, is way more of an expert than I am in that space for sure. They've been doing it a lot longer, but we have successfully gotten it coming out. And I'll say this, I mean, we've got incredibly smart engineers writing our code for our transcoder here. There's no question, but it only took a couple of days, right? So it's there in the kit from Dolby. It's not difficult to implement and turn on. And Dolby's been a tremendous partner through all of that. So stay tuned, because we're pushing pretty hard to get this thing over the line.
Well, and we'll see this. I think we'll really see pretty more and more wide deployments of AC4 going forward, and partly that's enabled by streaming, because it's just layering on another codec option there.
It's chicken and egg right now, right? You've got a lot of devices that support it, but there are a number that don't. And there are a lot of people who want to do it, but point to those devices that don't as some of their primary devices, right? So if we don't start enabling these things in the ecosystem pre-consumer device, those ones that don't support it or perhaps need a little bit of a push to finish a better implementation for a streaming piece, they need us to tell them that we're doing it, right? So if there's any interest, let's get together and push on some of these manufacturers to get this stuff done.
Yeah. I guess I should mention now, for those of us who are going to be at NAB, the SVG Audio Roundtable is Monday morning. I think we have some informal discussions of this, and this is a big topic for us. I think most of you guys are on invitation for that, but anybody on this call is welcome to join us for that. So, anything else? Rob, any final words?
No, other than I just think this is an exciting time to be in the audio space. And like, it's just encouraging to me, someone who kind of, or my research past was all about object-based audio. And we've, like James was saying, like, we've been talking about this next generation audio, and it's kind of cool that it's becoming a bit of a now generation audio almost, that like stuff's actually happening and the use cases are there, the kind of regulatory appetite is there, consumer appetite is there, and as you can see by this call, vendor appetite is there and broadcaster appetite is there. So it feels kind of like a good thing for me that we're like, oh, we're actually doing it now rather than just talking about it. So I think this is a good time.
Well, and there's some economic drivers of it, that we see this sort of more and more efficient exploitation of content means if we can reach a larger audience by putting something in their native language or providing accessibility, it means we can get more eyeballs on our content. So there are good commercial drivers for this. So this isn't something we're just doing to be virtuous or whatever. It's going to make Warner Brothers or Netflix or whoever more money. So that's relevant.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, thank you all. And thank you, Heather, for putting this all together. Appreciate it. And Rob, everybody, good to see you. And we'll see you in a couple weeks, or most of you at anyway, in a couple weeks in Las Vegas.